There we go. Hi, Wendy. Oh, Wendy has no sound yet. Susan, you're trying to get in again. Do you know that? Oh, look, it's noon. All right, it's noon. We should do this, huh? Hi, everybody. Nice to see you all. Nice to see your faces.
You too.
And we're going to study about tattoos today, which is a result of a conversation that started in the prayer class a couple weeks ago. And I said, you know, I'm teaching lunch and learn at the end of the month. We'll talk about tattoos then. So that's how this came to be. And that's what we're going to talk about today. But first, we'll start with our blessing for Torah study. We say, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So as we talk about tattoos today, I want to offer a first caveat, which is that I have no motive on anybody's opinion and changing anybody's mind to something different. All good, Marshall. No motives in this in changing minds. I think that we have an obligation to sort of struggle with ideas and understand things. And this is one, the topic of tattoos has spiraled a bit. And so we're gonna look at what's actually there. I think it's an important process to go to what our texts actually say and then form an opinion, as opposed to forming an opinion based on all kinds of layers of other things. Fair enough? So we are gonna look, I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, so we are gonna look at tattoos. We're gonna look at a couple of different examples of conversations about markings. So that's what we're gonna start with. So we're gonna look at this first one first. And so here in Genesis, it says, then the Lord said to him, not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest anyone who found him should attack him. So what happens before here? Does anybody want to offer us a little bit of context to this moment? What's happening with Cain? What's the deal?
Killed Abel.
Killed Abel, not a great thing to do, right? God's not particularly happy with him. And God has some sense of protection over him and puts the mark of Cain. And so partly it's sort of a dual mark. Partly it identifies the lineage of Cain, which has all kinds of retributions through the generations. But what does God say? Put the mark on Cain, lest anyone who found him should attack him. Vayisam the Cain ot. So an ot can be a lot of things. In modern Hebrew, otiot are the letters. Sometimes an ot is a sign. Pretty standardly, this is translated here as a mark, some kind of physical mark you put on Cain. It has to be physical. Why? It has to be visible by humans and something we recognize as a physical mark. Otherwise, how would other humans know about it? Right? How would anybody know not to harm him? So some kind of physical mark goes on Cain's body. And what's the point of that physical mark? What's the function?
To identify him.
Identify him for
and
what,
to
Wendy?
protect him.
Oops.
So Wendy and Natalie said identify, and Margie said protect him. It's twofold. It's identify for protection, right? That's what that mark is for. It's about protection. So nothing negative in there. It's a sign of protection, right? So far we have nothing negative. We're going to keep building. Let's look at Isaiah. Here's what Isaiah says. But Zion said, the Lord has forsaken me. My Lord has forgotten me. Can a woman forget her nursing child, that she should have no compassion on the son of her womb? Even these may forget, yet I will not forget you. Behold, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands. Your walls are continually before me. So this is a cry out about not forgetting God. Even if God has forgotten me, I won't forget God. And what's the sign of that? On the palms of your hands. I've engraved you on the palms of your hands, which sounds brutally painful. It's supposed to be one of the worst places to get a tattoo is the palms of your hands. Hurts me to think about. But so how is this mark functioning here? We've got another physical mark on a body. So first we saw an angle of it from Cain, which is about protection. How does this mark function?
It's a reminder.
A reminder of what?
Oh, I can't remember the story exactly. Of God.
A reminder of God. Absolutely. And arguably a reminder of who they are, right?
Identity.
I am a person of God. And this is so core to who I am, I won't let go of this, right? Even if God forgets me, I won't forget God. And so it's a mark on my hand. Hands are really central to how others view us, right? It's a body part that's pretty much always visible.
Reminds me of when you take notes on your hand,
Yeah, for like a test.
Sort
Or Janet, did you want to say something?
Yeah, is that like with henna, what women do on their
Oh,
is to remind them of God?
Henna's not like that.
interesting. I actually don't know much about the origins of henna.
Henna-
I don't know much about it. I just know that it's gorgeous. And I know more about sort of the ritual implications in modern times than the origin, actually. That's interesting. I'll look into it.
Have you ever seen somebody marked with anything at the palm of their hands?
Yeah, people with tattoos in the palms of their hands, for sure.
I've never seen, with my boys and everything else, I've never seen a tattoo in the palm of the hands, ever.
Oh, I have. I also, I find tattoos fascinating. I'll out myself on that one. And so I watch a lot of tattoo related television. If you didn't know that existed, it does. I watch it. I have like already come clean many times. I watch an extraordinary amount of television. I always have something running in the background.
So you watch the tattoo channel?
It's not a channel, but there is a show called Ink Master, which is
Yeah.
wild craziness. It's on Paramount. It used to be on Spike, and so I had it. It's on Paramount, which is not a channel I have. But there's all kinds of YouTube videos of it. I can send you if you're interested. Palms of the hand are tattoos, and lips you can do your tongue.
I've seen the lips and the tongues, but I've never seen the palms of the hand.
Most people don't do it because it's so painful.
Yeah, it's gotta really hurt.
I'm just thinking about everything is painful about that.
Yes, in fact. But so we've now got two physical marks on our bodies, on our collective body, on a body. The first is about a sign of protection, and the second is about commitment to God and commitment to who you are. Fair? Okay. So let's look at this next one. Then we've got Ezekiel. I'm sick of my own voice already. Does someone want to read for us from Ezekiel?
Sure, I will.
Thanks, Margie.
Ezekiel. And the Lord said to him, pass through the city, through Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and groan over all the abominations that are committed in it. And to the others, he said, in my hearing, pass through the city after him and strike. Your eye shall not spare, and you shall show no pity. Ooh.
So what actually happened here? Let's make sure we're all on the same page.
I'm not sure, but it sounds like they're marked for death.
So let's look at, this is a little confusing, which is why I want us to look. So God is saying, pass through the city, through Jerusalem, and put a mark on the foreheads of the men who sigh and groan over all the abominations that are committed. And to the others, you go through and strike. This is generally read as, this is a sign of protection over the ones who get that this is bad. Right? Does that make sense? It's a little hard to follow. So they're saying, oh, there's a chat. Hold on. Thanks, Sharon, for sharing. So they're saying, so think about, we just talked about this morning, Lori and Wendy and Sandy. Michael has a tattoo in his background now, palm tattoos. So we just talked about this morning, actually, right? Think about the final plague and the killing of the firstborn son. What do? They mark the houses of the ones to skip. This is sort of a similar practice. We're marking the ones who know something bad is happening, who aren't a part of the problem. We're marking them with this sign so that as they come through to destroy and show no pity, you know who to leave alone. So how does this mark function? Shana, you had a skeptical face. How does this mark function? Our first was protection. Our second is about identity and commitment. How would you define this one?
I have a senior moment. What's the third one?
Third one is this in Ezekiel about marking the foreheads of those who see the atrocities of what's happening in Jerusalem. In some ways, I see this one as a combination of the two, of the first two. It's protection. And why have these people earned protection? Because of their commitment, right? Mark the committed people, it will keep them safe. Does that make sense? It's very quiet today.
Rabbi,
Yes.
just, these are permanent markings, right? Everyone that you've talked about at this point.
That is the assumption with these texts. I mean, again, these are things that we don't necessarily know for sure. We don't know many, many things for sure. But the assumption is, yes, that these are some kind of permanent mark.
Okay, is this leading up to why we shouldn't get tattoos today?
We're going to get there. We're going to get there too. I'm going to reframe what your language on it and say we're going to look at modern views of tattooing.
Okay,
Because there's some debate over if we're not supposed to get tattoos.
because all I've done is tell my boys who will all have tattoos, that's not something we do.
So stay tuned. Stay tuned, Paul. We'll see where we get.
Yeah, well, whatever I told them didn't work.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm also, for context here, I am the only member of my family who does not, my immediate family who does not have a tattoo. My parents and my brother all have at least two, and they all have at least one that is Jewishly related.
I just want to get a dancing bear.
A dancing bear.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the background here. And I'll tell you that when I've shared this story with some of you, when I was applying to rabbinical school, the first question they ask in the interview, you get to choose. So you choose a question. And the second question is, tell us about your family, followed by, tell us about your family Jewishly. And as I answered that question, I said, I was raised in a family where Judaism was a huge part of our identity, but we also had the freedom to say, like, this is what I connect to in Judaism, and this is how I connect. This is how I relate to my Judaism. And I, as an example of that, shared that when my brother had turned 18, he and my dad went and got Hebrew tattoos together because that felt like cementing and standing in their Jewish identity as men. And I shared this piece as sort of an example of that. And the poor woman on my search committee, it looked like I had just slapped her right in the face. And I'm sitting there like, I'm such an idiot. I'm such an idiot. They're not going to let me be a rabbi. They're not going to let me in because I told them that my brother has a Hebrew tattoo. What was I thinking? How stupid could I be? They let me in anyways. It worked out okay, but I did have a serious panic about the way that others would relate to the fact that I had shared this piece.
Rabbi, what is the nature of their tattoos of your brother and your
so
father?
they've all got a couple different ones. My brother, do we know the story of 2 notes in your pockets? Right, we have this idea we should have 2 notes in our pockets at all time. One says the whole world was created for me, and the other says I'm but dust and ashes. And essentially the secret to balancing our lives is knowing when to pull which note at what moment.
What do you mean? What do you mean by pockets?
So the literal idea was originally physically in your pockets, and then it's sort of extended to like a metaphorical pocket. You should have the conception of these 2 ideas and know when to pull on which, right? That when you're down, you can say the whole world was created for me. And when you're a little too high and mighty, you can pull yourself down and say, I'm but dust and ashes. And so my brother has those in Hebrew on his arms. one on each arm, because that's really how he balances his life. What are other ones? My parents, for their 25th wedding anniversary, got ani v'dodi v'dodi, which is a Hebrew wedding vow. So they each have half of it on their arms with a branch, and the branch is a branch from a tree that my brother has on his ribs. Ribs are a terrible spot. That in the roots of the tree, it says family is strength. And the other thing I'll tell you, they each have a couple more, but my dad has one right here. This is the controversial one that says Am Yisrael Chai, right here. And so we're gonna talk about that and how we land to there.
I
First,
just
we're
thought, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Alan.
I just thought of all the years of talking about tattoos, if you have a tattoo that you can't see, is that considered you don't have a tattoo? Or you have to confess, I have a tattoo, but it's on my, back, something.
That's a great question. We'll see how we feel about it as we keep moving. So we just looked at 3 pieces of Tanakh that all talk about a physical marking on our bodies in a positive light, right? Would we agree that this is a positive explanation? All of those markings are to do something good. We don't have a negative perception of these markings yet. Wendy, you look suspect. Unmute, Wendy.
I was just thinking, but you said yet, so that saved you, because you know what I think of, the markings on the Holocaust.
We're gonna get there.
I
Intentionally, we didn't start there because
right.
everybody's got a preconception about this, right? We're not gonna start there. We're gonna look at, because those preconceptions are based on a whole number of factors. And I think it's really important for us to go through, on tattoos, on any subject, to go through the process of stripping layers off to look at what things actually say, right? That's what we're doing today. So open-mindedness to the extent that we can have it. So far, we've got 3 pieces that say, here are the ways that we marked people for good reasons, okay? Now we're gonna get to what everybody knows. It's coming, here it is. Not hiding it from you. Leviticus, this is the classic don't tattoo piece. This is where it all comes from. It doesn't matter that we have these other references, that we have other evidence of tattoos in biblical times. None of that matters in the way that this has been translated. I think it all matters. I think it matters. None of it has played a role in our modern conception of tattoos. So here's where what we've built came from. You shall not round off the hair on your temples or mar the edges of your beard. This is how Orthodox men have payas, the curlies, right? That's where that comes from. I'm looking at a lot of men with no beards. So, or beards and no, I see no payas at the moment. Although Matthew, if he goes too long between haircuts, Matthew gets some payas going. It's really quite something.
What about no hair?
Well, so
already,
this is not something we're following, just for context, with no judgment on that. This isn't a practice we hold to. Then it says, you shall not make any cuts on your body for the dead or tattoo yourselves. I am the Lord. So if we look at this is the word that becomes the word for tattoo. I kept the tattoo yourselves as the translation because that's how we've come to translate it, but it's a unique word. It's some kind of marking of yourself, right? We call it tattoo yourself. You shall not make any cuts on your body for the dead or tattoo yourselves. I am the Lord. So there's all kinds of interesting things that happen with this line. And scholars have questioned if we have, if the idea of not being buried in a Jewish cemetery if you have a tattoo comes from this, because we have this reference to not harming the dead in the same place. There's some question if that's where this originates, right? Because not being buried in a Jewish cemetery with a tattoo is not a given. That's an individual cemetery's choice. There are many cemeteries. I don't actually know that I should check for today. I don't know the rules on our cemeteries. But I'm actually pretty sure you can be buried at Fairmount with a tattoo. Jerry, do you know?
No, I don't know, but it doesn't say not to harm the dead. It says don't put marks on your body for the dead.
So yes, there's some question of the translation here. Hold on, I'm pulling up. Wait, let me stop this share.
Does
Sorry.
that have anything to do with the Kriya? That you shouldn't perform Kriya on your own body?
That may be where this comes from. That's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm pulling up. Hold on one second. Hold on. Where's what I'm looking for? So here's another translation that is often a translation I'll play with, right? Translations are interpretations. So we're really looking at different interpretations of this line. You may not make cuts in your flesh in respect for the dead, or have marks printed on your bodies. I am the Lord. So this line is read in one of two ways, right? Either in don't put something on your body that's for the dead, or don't put marks on the body of the dead. It has been read in both ways because you cannot, there's a lot of room within the Hebrew to start to sort of play with things. This is what we do with our tradition. We spin it and we turn it and we look at different angles and try and see how we could understand this, right? In reasonable lights, reasonable understandings of the text. So we have this one place where we say, don't mark your body. Here's the interesting thing we've done about tattoos. We've separated tattoos from piercings. Piercings are marks on your body. Anybody have their ears pierced? Yeah, I've got a whole bunch. I've got cartilage ones all the way up. I've let some of them go. I used to have more. I have my nose pierced, which people tend to forget because it's hidden in there. We have piercings. What's the difference between a tattoo and a piercing? Fundamentally, like really think through what can we separate out as the difference between a tattoo and a piercing?
Well, I would say
A tattoo would be permanent, a piercing could not be permanent. Because you could, like you just said, you could let it cover up.
So I have let those go. I still have holes. I will have holes there for the rest of my life.
Okay.
They will never go anywhere. If I take this nose piercing out, I'll have what looks like a big blackhead on my nose forever. It's there. It's sometimes piercings can close, but it's not a given. When you get a piercing, you need to know that you're making a permanent commitment, right? It is potentially permanent, including the same thing as, especially if you start to get into gauges, which is where people stretch and have like the hole through, the see-through thing, which, excuse me, yeah, I can't do it. Michael, yeah.
Yeah, to me, the difference is that a piercing goes through the skin, whereas a tattoo is on the surface.
And so how does that feel different for you? What do you think? How do you think that plays in here?
I don't think it is different. I think it's kind of the same thing because both of them, you're still piercing the skin, whether you go all the way through the skin or whether you go to the surface of it, you are changing it in some way.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to say the piercing is much more easier to get than the tattoo, especially if you're a basketball player.
Piercings are a lot easier than tattoos. They're faster. That's true. Lori?
Well, how about something with the dye? With a tattoo, there's an introduction of a foreign substance into the body, whereas with a piercing, there isn't.
Interesting. Yeah, you're introducing something new. Although with a piercing, you're then putting something through your body, right? So when I take an earring, I then put it through. I'm touching my nose ring, which just looks like I'm itching my nose to you. You put something through your body. If we're going to look at what these first three texts show about putting a mark, all of those marks had reasons. And one of the interesting things about separating this is about, I'll give you a spoiler alert. I am pro tattoo. I think our tradition is pro tattoo, but not stupid tattoos. I think our tradition is in support of tattoos that are for a purpose, that are a statement of identity, right? So my dad has these tattoos this one here and the arms with my mom, they talk about who he is as a Jewish man, as a husband. He jokes about wanting to get like a little man with a lawnmower and keeping a patch of his chest shaved. He thinks that's really funny. I think that's not a tattoo that is part of Jewish culture, that is supported by our tradition. Marshall.
Well, 60 years ago, when I took an anatomy class, almost at that time, the cadavers that we had were the male ones that had tattoos almost always had a brain tumor. And I asked the professor, was I out of line with that observation? And he said at that time, it was like 0.9, almost a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, I think today their techniques would be much better, but to think that the tattoo just stays there, and though, like I said, before 60 years ago, it did have systemic absorption.
Interesting. Huh. To my knowledge, there's nothing supporting any health risks of tattooing at this point, other than sometimes a bad response to the tattoo happening itself in the moment. I don't know of any long-term effects. Sometimes people from the pain can have a reaction, or their skin might not take ink well. So if you have sensitive skin, they'll often sort of do a test dot on you to see how it goes. But what I think is interesting, if we're going to ascribe this meaning to marks on our bodies, as we did in these first 3 texts, piercings, you can't really ascribe much meaning. Right?
Jordy, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
About, I'd say maybe 50 years ago, I don't know. It was told to us as Jews that when you get a piercing, you're desecrating your body. Okay, so see, I can tell. Okay, so what's our take on that? I know things have changed. And I mean, it made you feel like if you were going to get your ears pierced, that you have sinned forever and God was going to punish you. So of course, the first thing I did when I went to college is I got my ears pierced.
Yeah, ears pierced. That is one that most of our tradition has let go of on the piercing piece.
Okay.
And what's interesting is all of the evidence about what we know of biblical times, right? We talked about the few of us this morning, right? We like to think of the Israelites as really separated. Jewish people as really separated from other cultures. They weren't. They were highly influenced. And what we believe from the time is that these women likely had many piercings.
Okay.
That this was a practice they engaged in. Same with tattooing. Same with marking of the body to understand your tribal affiliation. These are all things they did. It's us who later adds these layers. So we're going to look at these layers and how we've reached here. So it's all coming off of this Leviticus text right up here. We're going to build off of this. So this is the Mishnah. We're going to look at Mishnah, Talmud, and Tosefta. We'll talk about what Tosefta is. So the Mishnah says, with regard to one who tattoos his skin, if he made a mark but did not tattoo in it, that is, did not fill it in with ink, or tattooed in it, that is, made ink marks on the surface of the skin, but did not mar, so that the process of tattooing was not complete, he's not liable, right? So we have conversations about who's liable. Did you break the rule is what that means. Saying these are the scenarios in which they didn't break the rule. Often the rabbis like to narrow down the categories of breaking the rule. We see them do this in a lot of different discussions, right? To try and limit sort of the punishment and make it a little more okay. Why? Because there were too many people who would then be in a category where something would have gone wrong, right? So they play with this. Okay, so there's the not liable. He is liable only when he marks and tattoos with ink or eye paint or anything that leaves a permanent mark. Rabbi Simon ben Judah says that in the name of Rabbi Simon, he is liable only when he writes the name of God. As it is written in the Torah, Leviticus 10, do not incise any marks on yourselves. I am the Lord. If it's not Leviticus 10, I don't know how that got there. It's Leviticus 19. Okay, so what does the Mishnah say? The Mishnah is offering this opinion down here that you're only liable, you've only broken this if you tattoo God's name. How are they getting that? Because at the end of the line Up there, it says, I am the Lord. Do not incise any marks on yourselves. I am the Lord. Saying you're only breaking it if what you tattoo on you is God's name. A little bit of a stretch because a lot of things end with, I am the Lord. Right? And don't then modify what came before. So it's actually a really interesting stretch the rabbis are making. And when that happens, you have to look at why. Why are they pushing? Why are they limiting the category of who has broken this prohibition? Who is liable? So my favorite example of when rabbis narrow down a category of who's liable is in the conversation of Ben Sorer Umoreh, a stubborn and rebellious child. So we're told a stubborn and rebellious child is supposed to be put to death. The rabbis are troubled by this. And so the rabbis spill an unbelievable amount of ink and energy to narrow that category so that essentially nobody's in it. They narrow and they narrow and they narrow, including a detailed discussion of age as marked by stages of puberty and development. They go down to how many hairs someone grows on their body. They get very specific because they're trying to narrow down this category because it's upsetting to them how many people could end up in it. It's not unreasonable to read a little bit of that here, that they're narrowing the category because, why? Could it be because too many people would be in it? That their people were tattooing, or they felt people would tattoo, and so they want to narrow the category? Maybe. We can't know any of this, but if we look at sort of paralleled processes and actions, we can make reasonable cases. So that may be what they've done here. Thoughts, comments, rebuttals? Okay. We're going to look. Yeah, Jerry.
I agree.
So we're going to look at what the Talmud adds here. Let's see. So Talmud is Mishnah plus Gemara. Gemara is the innovation of Talmud. So the Talmud is building, wrong screen. That was my email. All right. The Talmud adds, they're expanding off what the Mishnah says. Said to him, Rav Aha Barya of Rabbah to Rav Asi, until one will explicitly write, I am God. He said to him, no, it is like that which Bar Kapra taught. One is not liable until the name of an idol is written. As it says, or any incised writing upon you, I am Adonai, I am God and no other. So what's the potential addition here the Talmud's adding? So one's saying it's only if you write, I am God in the tattoo. You write God's name in the tattoo. What's the other one saying? No, it's not that.
It's an idol.
Saying if you do this for idol worship. That's what he's saying. No, it's only when you do it to that extent. It's not even about writing God's name. It's about this tattoo being worshiping an idol. And how do we know this? Because after it says, I am God. This to me is a better interpretation of the juxtaposition of these two pieces, right? That this affirming, I am God, after the statement is about backing it up. Remember, it's all about me, one God, that's it. You don't have these idols. And so they're backing it up. I think that's a better interpretation of why it has the I am the Lord right after. It's saying not for idol worship. Thoughts? So the one piece I'm going to add on here is we have something from the Tosefta, which really clarifies this. So the Tosefta are sort of a collection of additional thoughts that were likely oral, part of our oral tradition, that aren't really part of the Mishnah. They don't make it into this codified Mishnah, but they're part of the tradition that's sort of swirling around there. And here's what it's eventually written. Here's what the Tosefta says. And one is not liable for punishment until one writes and incises with dye or blue for the purpose of idol worship. Tosefta is very clear. So what has our rabbinic tradition said? What's the overall sort of, if you're going to condense what the Mishnah, Talmud, and Tosefta have said, what does our rabbinic tradition say about tattoos?
Good.
Someone made a noise, but I don't know who it was.
That they're okay, unless they promote worshiping idols. It's made me think of marketing. It's okay to market God as one, but not idols.
Yeah, nothing in our rabbinic tradition says don't tattoo.
What
None of
if
it's an outright
somebody-
prohibition.
What if somebody puts a tattoo on a child that's born, like you do a bris, but they put a tattoo on this child that said, "This is God. I am God." That child would not be responsible for it, obviously, but what happens then?
That's a great question. That is then on the parent because they have made the choice. I think it's on the chooser. And it's then very unfortunate to be that child. I'd also like to meet the tattooist who will tattoo a baby. Because that's a violation of all kinds of things.
Yeah.
Well, that's akin to naming the baby. The baby has to live with that for a long time. So you should be careful. Now, forget about the 60s. That's,
Oh, I understand that. I was just pointing out I was thinking outside the box. Let's
No,
put it
you
that
are
way.
thinking outside the box. In that case, it's the parent. It's the parent and whoever does the tattooing who are liable in that scenario because they are the ones who made the choice and made it happen, right?
Yeah, and until about 15 or 20 years ago, you couldn't. Now they actually have clinics where you can take the tattoos off. It's actually
Yes,
quite
you can
painful.
laser. It's
Yeah.
with varying success. It depends on how dark. I watch a lot of tattoo TV, as I mentioned. Depends how
Okay.
dark the tattoo itself is, and tattoos that were applied correctly and well are much harder to laser off because they're deeper into the skin because they're meant to last. So actually, a bad tattoo is easier to laser off.
And that would be Angelina Jolie because hers with Billy Bob on her arm is still there. You can still see it. In cosmetics, we had people come in. I'm getting married. My gown has, I'm bare at the shoulders. Please remove this tattoo. Well, first of all, you got to go to a doctor for that. But there really is nothing that you can even conceal the tattoo with.
There is now, if you look on YouTube, I'll send you, Wendy, it's wild. They do these videos of people who are, tattooed head to toe and wanting them to see what it would look like without it. And they cover the whole thing. They look totally like I'll send it to you. It's wild to watch.
Okay, so they cover it. They don't remove it.
They cover it. No, they cover it.
So they
Temporary cover.
So what about the little babies that we see, like 3 and 4 months old with pierced ears? I don't think we see a lot of that in our culture, but there are, so that's on the parents, obviously.
It's a parent's choice, but also, the rules about piercings have not necessarily carried over. We don't really make a lot of statements about piercings. And I think if we're going to look at, foundational to all of this is I'm created in God's image, right?
Yeah.
I am created in God's image. And so how do I honor the fact that my body was made to be like God? Am I honoring this body or am I not? Which we talked about last month. We talked about the way we fuel our bodies and the food we put in it. Is it honoring this body? Margie, I think you've been wanting to say something.
It's International Holocaust Day, so I was thinking about the tattoos from being identified as a Jew, and whether that, for any amount of time now or ever, created some sort of or create some sort of anti-tattoo feeling.
So it's a great transition because I really want us to talk about how do we get from what these texts say to where we stand with now with tattoos, right? So we've sort of come to an agreement. Our texts are not clearly outright saying no tattoos, but our culture, Jewish culture, says Jews don't get tattoos, right? And you can't be buried in a Jewish cemetery. So clearly, we've had some kind of evolution in the process. And while the Jewish community was already fairly anti-tattoo pre-Holocaust, it has upped it significantly. Why? Because they forced tattooed Jews in Auschwitz with a number and said, this is who you are, it's a number. I'm trying to pull the article up. I was reading something this week. I'll find it. It's there's actually a number of grandchildren at this point of Holocaust survivors who are getting their grandparents' number tattooed on them, which some people find abhorrent, or some people react like emotionally, like I just watched Wendy do. It's complicated. How do you feel about that? I won't even say what sort of the reactions are. How does that sit with you? What's your reaction to that?
Well, first I thought, well, what a tribute to their grandparents. I mean, look what these people went through. And so I look at it just instantaneously. I never even thought of that. I never even heard of that. That good for them. They're honoring these people. I mean, and then on the other side, the number has a bad connotation as to what it stood for, but nothing surprises me anymore.
It could play into the thing that we know we shall not forget.
Exactly.
That's their display of not forgetting.
Well, I think you could respect your grandparents in memory many ways besides a tattoo. I'm anti-tattoo, so I guess you picked up on that.
Just for your own reading later, I just put an article in the chat about someone who did this and how his family reacted. And there's actually a really, I'll just screen share just to show you the photo. Here's the photo in the article of a woman with her grandson. And here's his tattoo. And hers is right. Can you see right there? Here's hers and here's his. And I believe that I'm attributing the right story. You can read the article. Her first response was anger, and her second response was a lot of love. It's why my dad tattooed right here, because for him, that felt like a powerful symbol of we'll never forget, right? Am Yisrael Chai means the Jewish people live. And so he tattooed it right here because to him, that felt like the ultimate statement, right? I take responsibility that I will do everything I can, that this doesn't happen again, and that the Jewish people live in the face of what happened, right? And so that plays into his feelings of sense of responsibility to raise Jewish children, which I'm a rabbi, so he did it, you know, and my mom did all right, but about continuing Jewish life in the face of what has happened. What's happening in the chat? Sandy said, what about birthmarks? Right, birthmarks are a different story because birthmarks we're born with. That is a piece of our bodies as they were created.
I think that
also, their tattoos are sometimes used cosmetically. Like if a woman who has had a mastectomy, they tattoo the areola back onto the reconstructive surgery so they can feel that everything is back to normal.
So it's so funny. I had this up on my computer already. This is a responsa from the CCAR. So this is heard the best description of what a responsa is, what responsa are this week. It's like an advice column. Like, Dear Abby, you write into the rabbis and you say, here's the question, the she'elah, and then here's the answer. So here's a question. So this is 5759. So that is 21 years ago. Does that math check out? 22 years ago? So yes. Things have already shifted a bit. I'll tell you that there's and I can link it in the chat as well there. In 2014, Reform Judaism magazine, which I'm pretty sure doesn't exist anymore, did a large spread about tattoos. That was really interesting. And so things have certainly evolved since then. But here was a question that someone wrote in. A congregant plans reconstructive breast surgery following a radical mastectomy. Her surgeon will tattoo an areola on the reconstructed breast. She wishes to know whether this would violate the traditional Jewish prohibition against tattooing. So this is written from a place of assuming Jews are anti-tattoo, which has definitely evolved since this was written. And And they walk through, absolutely this permits. Here are the reasons where you think it might not permit. And it's very interesting. I can link this to you if you're interested in reading it. And I think that sort of the age of it is important to offer in context. I'm going to put it in the chat. And I will also link the Reform Judaism magazine, just if you're interested in some further reading on it. But absolutely, so that's a tattoo. And I think that really where we start to boil down to in tattoos is what's the intention behind it? That seems to be sort of where we're landing. And so, Marshall, how do you feel about a tattoo like that?
Oh, I think it's absolutely fine, because that's going to help a woman. If they're having reconstructive surgery, they're going to go through with the whole process. They're doing it for the cosmetic, for their own self-esteem, and I think it's very important that they have it.
So
that's what they want.
Can I push you again? What about a woman who doesn't have reconstructive surgery, as many women choose not to, will have a mastectomy, does not have reconstructive surgery? Very common for women to then get tattoos over their chest where their breast had once been, as a reclaiming that space as something of beauty. What do you think of that? Like I've seen big flower pieces, all kinds of things across their chest if they choose not to have reconstructive surgery.
Well, it's for their mental health, so that I don't have a problem with it.
So it's interesting because this becomes a slope, right? So a really common tattoo now is a semicolon. It's become a symbol of, it's common for people to get them here on their wrist. It's become a symbol of support for mental health, that we get stopped, that especially for people who suffer from depression, that depression can sort of stop them in their tracks and then they keep going. Right? What does a semicolon do? It stops a sentence and then it keeps going. It adds to it, right? And so for many, that is a mental health experience as well, right? I think we start to really get into not a slippery slope because that's so negative, but we start to snowball about how do you draw lines here about what is and isn't okay, right? Somewhere between tattooing after reconstructive surgery to, the little man pushing a lawnmower on your chest, which people do in the back of the head, people do it all over, right? Something silly. How do we start to draw lines about whose tattoo is for the right reasons, whose are for good emotional reasons and not? So there are books and exhibits called Art Rage Us about permanent body art after cancer. Thank you, Sharon. Yeah, it's a big phenomenon. Or people who I just read an article about it the other day, people who have big scars from various health procedures, various issues they've had, and they tattoo them in different ways to sort of own it. I saw one where a man had heart surgery, so he had a big scar down his chest. And on one hand, it was like a surgeon with a scalpel, and sort of commemorating this life-giving procedure he had. And the other thing, Jane raised in the chat about Orthodox women who tattoo makeup. Tattooing on makeup is very, very big in the ultra-Orthodox communities. They tattoo it on because, so if you're not going to, there are 39 prohibited categories of work on Shabbat, the malachot of Shabbat is what we call them. And if you're not going to work on Shabbat, one of them is washing. Right, more so in the idea of like washing clothes, but it then becomes about washing your body. So people don't shower on Shabbat. You shower before Shabbat and you shower after. You're still showering every day, but just waiting, right? And so if you put on your makeup on Friday night and Saturday morning, it's all kinds of funky, you then aren't supposed to wash it off or redo it. And so Orthodox women have come to tattoo. So they tattoo eyeliner on pretty regularly. Some tattoo, some lip business. It doesn't actually last that long. It has to be redone periodically because it doesn't stay in those parts of the skin very well. Some tattoos don't. Like an inside the lip tattoo is a temporary experience. Those do not stay forever. But Orthodox women absolutely tattoo their makeup on. Very common. I know many women who've done it. And so if we have this prohibition If it were legal, would they be doing it? If the prohibition was legal and not culturally imposed?
Just a thought.
Mhm.
If for a while there, the women, the ultra-Orthodox women were getting very nice wigs and hairpieces and stuff like that. And some of the rabbis came down on that because it was looking too much on their normal hair. So they were supposedly wearing a plain wig so they wouldn't be attractive to other men. But if they're putting the makeup on with a tattoo, isn't that the same thing?
Yes, this becomes a whole nother issue, which I go off on all the time. If the idea is, first of all, a flawed idea that women are supposed to modify their behavior so that men might not be attracted to them, that puts a man's problem on women to fix, which I think is a problem in and of itself. But so if the idea is that these women are covering their hair so that other men won't be attracted to them because these men have no responsibility to control urges, apparently, but some of these women, they pay thousands of dollars for wigs, and their hair, the wigs are so gorgeous. My hair has never looked like that. A day in my life have not looked like these wigs. They're gorgeous and they're thick and they're flowing. They're beautiful, thousands of dollars. This is how we get away from what we're actually meant to be doing, right? Or what we're trying to do. When we don't pay attention to where these ideas come from, this is how you end up in a place like that, right? When you say Jews don't do tattoos, we don't do tattoos. But we don't look at where does that come from? Because it doesn't really come from our text so strongly as we are making the case for it now, right? This is the danger of not looking at where our ideas are coming from. Shayna has her hand up.
Thanks, Rabbi. I was just thinking, I was writing some notes while you were talking and what some of the other people were saying. I was thinking for me, I think it's about the spirit of learning where the rule or regulation comes from, and then understanding in my heart how it means for me or for someone else to follow it. And doing, not necessarily only with tattoos, but doing my best to learn and help educate, help enrich without necessarily telling someone else like, no, you should never do that. In some cases, I think there are some things that I believe like nobody should do ever, but
like murder.
I think this, yeah, right. I think the spirit of it though, I remember I was with, I don't know why this comes up fresh in my mind, but when I was in college, I went on a weekend trip with a group of friends. I went to college in Michigan. We had gone to Chicago, and one of the guys in our group, he identified himself as Shomer Shabbos. But then we're walking around, and he said, I remember this clear as day. He said, "Can somebody grab my wallet out of my pocket and buy me a coffee at Starbucks?" And I thought, that feels like so far of a stretch to me. And I know that he was sort of thinking like, oh, but we're out in the city. And it's like, he rode an elevator, but made one of the other people press the button. And I remember at that time kind of thinking, I don't know that that's the heart of it for me, right? Like, I don't know if that's really the heart of it. But then I think the flip side is I thought, if that's how you interpret and that makes you feel right, you're also not really hurting me if you do it. So I kind of kept my mouth shut. And I feel that way, I think about many things. Like I personally don't have tattoos. It's not for me. Like it's not for me, I think, from in terms of Judaism, but also just like in terms of just my preference. Like it's not for me. But I'm learning about the reading and the understanding, but I have pierced ears, and like, different things. And I don't know. I hope that makes sense what I'm saying. I could keep talking, but I'm just going to stop.
Ashina, I think you just defined Reform Judaism, right? You defined Reform Judaism. I believe in my core, I don't think we live up to this all the time, but in my core, I believe this is what Reform Judaism is meant to be. That we look at our tradition and then see how that sits on our heart, as you said, right? And see where that sits. I think here's my encouragement out of this tattoo conversation, which I'm sure has made many of you uncomfortable and maybe upset with me or whatever it may be. Here's what I would urge you to do. I think if you look at tattoos and say, I don't think this honors the idea of being created b'tselem Elohim, right? To be created in God's image, I feel like it's not right for me to then change the body that I was given from God. I think that's beautiful. I think it's really reasonable. I support you in that decision. Here's what I don't want us to do. I don't want us to say tattoos are bad because Judaism says you can't have a tattoo. Because Judaism's not saying we don't tattoo. That's not what our actual text says. And so if we're using the text as an explanation, that's not what it says. And so we have a responsibility to look and say, okay, what does it actually say? And then how do I feel about that? If you are still anti-tattoo, you started today anti-tattoo, you leave anti-tattoo, fully support you in that. Fully support you if that feels like it does not fit with your Jewish values and your understanding. What's important is not the outcome, it's the process. It's that I don't look and say, Judaism says no, without actually exploring the idea, because there's so much, there's so many layers in there. Right? We need to understand what it says so that we can then make an educated decision as opposed to holding on to the things we've heard over and over. Shayna, yeah.
Thank you. I just wanted to add one more thing after you said that. I have a friend of mine, not local to Denver, but she is someone, she's told me that for years, she's just fascinated with Judaism. She also, both her arms are completely tattooed. And she has said to me multiple times, like, I've considered converting, but like, I don't know that I'm allowed to. And one of her tattoos is similar to something you said. It's like a quote from, it's something related to one of her cousins who passed away. And, it's her identity. It's right on her arm. And I know that she's mentioned that. So I mentioned to her that, you were talking about this today. She was like, oh, wow. Because I think that sometimes on the surface, it's impossible to know everything about everything, whether it's Judaism or anything else. And sometimes, I think we've all had this experience. Someone sort of says to you, oh, well, Jews don't do this, or name any other group you're a part of. Like, these people don't do that. And sometimes you're like, oh, okay, like you have to sort of believe people in some capacity sometimes to be able to engage, or say like, no, that's totally wrong because of X, Y, Z. And it's just, it's an interesting, I've appreciated the perspective that you've brought to things about saying like, read, understand, learn, and find what's you. Because that really resonates with me.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. Thank you for sharing. I think that really is the answer. First of all, one of the things that drives my perspective on tattoos is that I could never look at a parent who's lost a child. Parents who lose children, I think, is the worst thing in the whole wide world. It's not supposed to happen. Right. And I will never look at a parent who's lost a child who wants to have a tattoo on their body to keep that child with them and say, Judaism says no to that. Judaism doesn't say no to that. Judaism says yes to honoring memory. Judaism says yes to supporting ourselves and our own health. Judaism says yes to so many of the things that inform how you get that tattoo. Right. I think, at the end of the day, I think what's really important to me is that we all, we don't just sort of blindly accept the things that have been said forever and ever. That Jews do this, Jews don't do that. Jews do this, Jews don't do that. We believe this, we don't believe that. I think that all of us have a responsibility to sort of engage in a process that as you find the next one of those, tattoos is a big one. It's a great example. I think that what we've done today is actually sort of modeling a process that can be overlaid onto any number of issues. And that's what I think is our task as Reform Jews, as thinking, breathing humans, is to question where those things come from, where something comes out of your mouth and you say, wow, why is that? Where did that come from? And it's been something I've really worked on myself in the last couple of years. And I love the process, right? When I catch myself on something and say, where did that come from, right? Why do we say that? And is that actually what's happening here? It's really important because this is how you get to women wearing thousands and thousands of dollars of expensive wigs, right? This is how we lose our tradition when we don't know what it actually says, right? When we rely on the layers and layers and layers that we've built upon it, and we aren't looking at the source to then determine how am I going to take that and live from my life, right? Not taking, thousands of years of layers and someone's bubby saying this and this bubby saying that, and use that as the basis for how we live our Jewish lives. Let's use our tradition as the basis for how we live our Jewish lives, right? And then make decisions from the core. I think that's one of our problems. We make decisions from the information over here when the core is over here, right? And tattoos is just one of them. And I truly, I do not care if you like tattoos or you don't like tattoos. I don't care. I care that you engage in a thoughtful process to decide how you feel about it, and you make that decision based on real information. That's my plug for you today. It's 1 o'clock. I want to respect everyone's time. I'm happy to stay on for a few minutes if you have more thoughts and things to say. But thank you for studying with us. Always a pleasure. And thanks for letting me badger you about tattoos and maybe push you a little.
Thank you.
Paul,
Rabbi?
yeah.
I had a thought about the difference between tattoos and piercings is God made holes in our body to do specific things, whereas God didn't put ink on our body.
Yes, and here's what I'd push back on you with. What is the purpose of the hole? Like the hole that God made for my mouth, right? Or the hole in my throat that lets food go down, those have purposes, right? This hole in my ears has no functional purpose in my body, right? I mean, it's not doing anything. It's different than, someone who has a feeding tube placed in their stomach. That's a hole that we've made in our body that has real value and purpose and function, right? I think that's the difference. I mean, and I only push because I think it's important. This is how we learn, right? This is how we go through this process, is to keep pushing and say, well, but what about that, right? And this process, what we're doing here, is actually the essence of our tradition. This is what our rabbis do, right? This is what sacred and holy debate looks like, where I push you and you say, well, but here's the problem with that. And you say, okay, right? Okay, so that's a problem, but how can I fill that problem? Here's the next idea. And then someone says, there's still a hole here, right? This is how we work through these issues and find our way to something that feels good and comfortable to us. And maybe not even comfortable, just reasonable to us. Paul, did you have something?
I did. First of all, thank you for today. And for me, it was additional information. And maybe when the boys were getting their tattoos, I didn't have as much understanding as I have today. For example, Nick had one tattoo on his calf of the English Channel. Well, he swam the English Channel, and that's why he put the English Channel on his calf. And I mean, that was always acceptable and everything else, but the additional tattoos that Andy had, at times, I think they meant something to him, but I can understand the mentality of it. And even Jeremy, who Susan just said, I think he regrets having tattoos from originally. I think that if they mean something to you, I think it's okay. I mean, the boys went through a lot of different things, and even, air spacers. And when I said to Andy, when he's getting his ear spaced, I said, why are you doing that? He says, I'm going back to my African heritage. I mean, and he let that go. I mean, they closed up, thank God. But it's thank you again for all the different explanations and your take on it. And just wanted to tell you I appreciate it. That's all.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate you too. Sharon, you have your hand up.
I do. I wanted to say two things. One, I appreciate it because I love feeling uncomfortable. I think that's where growth happens. And two, to add on to what you said about deciding for ourselves in an informed way what the text says, what also is important to me is who decides? Do I get to decide, or do rules and laws and people out there decide that often become systematically oppressive to specific groups of people?
Yeah. No, I think it's great. And I love what you said to start, which was that, growth comes out of the discomfort. That was the first thing they said to us. We showed up for our year in Israel as first year rabbinic students. And they said, this is your year to find comfort find a way to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. this is the year to learn how to do that.
Wonderful.
And it's of great value.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. If you want to join us tonight for prayer class, 7 o'clock, we'll be back at it, session 4 of 5. If you've come to none of them, you're still welcome to join. If you don't have the link, you can send me an email. You'll get a reminder email this afternoon from Lisa with the link again. So I will see many of you tonight, I think. And if not, hopefully we'll see you for Shabbat tomorrow, 6 p.m. per usual, or 9 a.m. on Saturday. Dan and I will be on tomorrow night. Rabbis Rick and Susan will be on Saturday morning. So an early Shabbat Shalom to everybody. And I'll see some of you tonight.